Hello again, everyone. It is Gordon Majak here, back with another episode of Timeless Pop, Rock, and Soul. And as I've been promising you, back with the final 70s song for a while, not forever and for all time, but for a while here. This is going to wrap up our run through the 70s musically. We are going to jump into some other eras and some other things here shortly, starting in the next video. It turns out that out of the, 250 some odd songs slash videos that I have posted here on the big channel, out of roughly 250, as of today, we will be at exactly 100 from the 70s. And I've always said that that was certainly my favorite time in music. And that has been reflected in the songs and the videos that I have put together here over the course of the last, 11 or 12 months, however long it's been here on the channel. So I've certainly well represented my favorite era there of the 70s, but I do want to sort of balance those percentages out just a little bit and move into some different musical territory. Era-wise, love the 70s, but yeah, we've had a pretty long and pretty good run through the decade here in these last few months. But as of this video, we're going to jump into some new stuff. So let's go out with one of my faves of the decade. How about we do that, huh? Spring of 1978, I remember it all too well for various reasons, but this was certainly one of the bright spots, and that is because this was the new album by Jefferson Starship called Earth, and this would have been the fourth album of this particular lineup of musicians, which I always thought was just such a stellar and such a legendary and classic group, the way those guys all played together, and Grace Slick counting her in there as well. Really a pretty cool lineup, and reflected in some of the great music that they did across those first few albums there. So, and we're going to hear one of the highlights today for sure. 1978, Jefferson Starship. So, you all know the background of Jefferson Airplane and everything, Grace Slick and Paul Kantner and all those guys back there in the 60s. I'm not going to get into any of that. I just really want to focus on this particular era of Jefferson Starship. And that is really started for all intents and purposes there in 1974 with the Dragonfly album. That's when they really sort of put the whole thing together. And Marty Balin, actually, one of my favorite lead vocalists, certainly of all time, just such a classic singer, the great Marty Balin. Marty Balin wasn't even a full-fledged member yet in 1974 when the other musicians put this thing together, but he did contribute a great song to that very first record back there in 74, the Dragonfly album. Marty Balin co-wrote with Paul Kantner a song called Caroline. That was 1974, and that was sort of the featured track, ended up being the track that I think got the most attention from that album. And of course, you know what happened next. The following year there in 1975, the Red Octopus album, Jefferson Starship, blows the roof completely off, led by just one of the great vocal performances, one of the great songs, not only of the decade, but of all of the whole timeless pop span of the ages there. And certainly one of my personal favorite songs, of course, I'm thinking of the classic Marty Balin ballad, Miracles. That's 1975. That's a top 3 song, and that just opens up a whole new world for Jefferson Starship. Marty Balin comes back the next year with that Spitfire album with Jefferson Starship, another classic Balin ballad, With Your Love. That was a number 12 hit there in 1976. 2 years later, we get to this album that I just showed you. Album comes out in the spring of 78. First single out of the box is another Marty Balin lead vocal performance. You think they figured out what was working pretty well there for the band, huh, by that point. Maybe it wasn't the full spectrum of the band's musical identity. I don't think there's much doubt about that. But no doubt that these Marty Balin vocals on the top of those great ballads really were what propelled the band's popularity during this stage, and their album sales and their single sales and their radio airplay and everything else. If it hadn't been for Marty Balin, And that's not to in any way, shape, or form diminish the talents of these fine musicians that I will mention here in just a second. But really, if it wasn't for Marty Balin out there in front, being such a legendary singer and just doing such a great job on those huge hit singles that I just mentioned, they really would have been probably in a much different space in their career. But after Count on Me, they're number 8 in 1978, and they follow it up with the song that we are going to hear today, and that's a composition called Runaway, not written by Marty Balin or written by anybody in the band, but certainly sung to perfection, yet again by Marty Balin. Runaway in the spring of 78 gets all the way up to number 12 on the pop chart, number 37 on the adult contemporary chart. But just one of those songs from back in the day, if you remember it in real time, as I do so well, because I was such a huge Marty Balin fan, and I was always way tuned into Jefferson Starship and what they were doing ever since that Red Octopus album there in 75. And as I said, Miracles was just such a devastating, incredible monumental musical performance in my eyes, and ever since that point I was always dialed into what Marty Balin and Starship was doing. And as I said, they just continued that run right on through the 70s there. And I want to give full credit here to this particular lineup, because this was the group that I think, it may have been Marty Balin out there in front with those signature ballads, but the musical support that he got, to put it mildly, is just so incredibly high on all of these big hit songs that I mentioned there, the Marty Balin ballads that were sort of the pop perception of Starship back then. Let's start with John Barbata on drums. John was a part of the band for this whole stretch there from 74 until after this album, when he and Marty Balin and several of the other members ended up departing. But John Barbata there on drums, a consistent figure throughout this great run. What a tasty drummer he was. How about the great Pete Sears on bass? He also doubled on keyboards on some of the other songs on the albums, but it just turns out that on these Marty Balin songs, or at least a number of them, it's Pete Sears just laying down some of the tastiest and most soulful and most supportive bass lines. Just so incredibly beautifully done. And the same could be said also for Pete Sears' counterpoint. There's another gentleman in the band, David Freeberg, who also doubled up on keyboards and bass. They used to alternate between one of them would play keyboards and one would play bass. In this particular song, David Freeberg will be on the organ. Such a tasty keyboard player, always really classy and really cool, memorable parts from David Freeberg. On guitar, it was what did they call this guy back in the day? He was just such a phenom, and just really one of the great guitarists. He was so young, I think, back in the day. He kind of stayed under the radar for a little while, but it did not take the great Craig Chaquico long to establish his name, certainly as a solo artist later in the 80s and the 90s. And into the 2000s, in that realm sort of between contemporary jazz and new age, and sort of an instrumental format. Craig Chaquico on guitar, always just such an extraordinary talent, such a versatile talent, could play the heck out of so many different kinds of acoustic guitars and electric guitars. And as you'll hear on this song, his lead guitar work, his solo guitar work, is always just so incredibly tasty and unique, and just filled with emotion, and really a great compliment to Marty Balin's vocals. You'll notice just some really great counterpoint going on back and forth between Marty Balin singing and Craig Chaquico on the guitar, so pay attention to that. On the rhythm guitar, of course, it's Paul Kantner, the mainstay of the band going all the way back to the 60s. On the backing vocals, it's, of course, Grace Slick, Paul Kantner's contemporary there, going all the way back to the very beginning. And then out in front, as I said, it is one of my all-time favorite crooners, man. You put the table up there, the VIP table up there in the front of the room for the really all-time great sort of ballad crooners, man. Marty Balin. He's got a ticket to the ball, because Marty Balin, I always just thought, one of the smoothest and most soulful and most passionate brothers when it came to laying down a ballad and singing to a lady and letting her know where he was coming from. Man, Marty Balin, just so much soul and so much passion in Marty Balin. Always, I love the songs he wrote, but even when he didn't write them, as was the case with this one, even when he didn't actually compose the song, he still sang the hell out of everything he got his hands on. And what a unique voice. And we certainly, even though we're leaving the 70s here as of today, we will be coming back around to the 70s again later, of course, and a number of those songs that I've already mentioned there will be showing up on the program because, man, Miracles, I mean, that's probably in my all-time top 10 or 15 songs right there, and I'm not even mentioning the other ones. So definitely not the last time Marty Balin will appear on the channel, but let's get to it. From 1978. How about the Earth album, the follow-up single to Count on Me? Remember how cool Count on Me was? That was such a great lead single. We will most definitely be playing that one, but this is the one we're going to hear today. There's Marty Balin with Paul Kantner in the middle, and of course Grace Slick from 1978. There's the whole crew, the whole lineup. Such a classic lineup, and as I said, these musicians, all really veteran musicians that had so much chemistry, really just great chemistry. They could play with so much feel, and never was it more apparent. And we'd have to include Papa John Creech in there too, because I know he's on some of these earlier songs that are like Miracles and stuff. But never was it more apparent than on the Marty Balin songs of just how supportive and how tasty and how professional these musicians could just sync up together and build such an incredible supporting track. And you'll hear it right here from 1978. It is Jefferson Starship with the great Marty Balin out front where he belongs, laying it on the line with his girl, a song called Runaway. Craig Chiquiso. Oh.
You don't know how much I love you, but I love you like the sun.
What a voice.
I like to put my arms around you. Run, 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 run away. Let's run, run, run away. Let's run, run, run.
So smooth. Great background vocals.
If you knew how much I miss you,
Oh, the guitar.
I miss you more each day.
Oh,
I really like to come and see. We could run,
Craig Chiquiso.
run away. Run, 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 run away. Let's run, run, run away. Sun's coming out, let's get my mind.
unreal. I wanted to stop that track 20 times and go back and play lines over for you again and draw attention to them, because there is such an incredible amount of cool shit going on in that. Well, first of all, it's all over the whole arrangement. There's so much cool shit going on. But specifically, I was just thinking in the rhythm section, man, the way Johnny Barbata just laid back so nice and chill on the drums and just left all that space for the musicians in the band to improvise and do their thing. So beautifully done on the drums. Pete Sears just killing it on the electric bass. Such an incredible tone, such incredible feel. Just like on all those other songs that I mentioned earlier, there's something about these Marty Balin vocal performances that just seems to bring out the absolute best in these players. And Pete Sears just laying down another killer bass line throughout this song. There's so many times I wanted to stop and go, listen to this brother on the bass. So warm and tasty and just such beautiful melodic counterpoint to the vocals only when it was needed. Really so well done from him. David Freeberg, of course, on the organ, as I said. Craig Chiquiso, let's not even talk about him for a second. Let's come back to Craig. Paul Kantner on the nice acoustic rhythm guitar over here on the left channel. Grace Slick there in the vocals. Craig Chiquiso, just a guitar giant. I mean, he was just really such a protege, and I don't even know what the right term is. Protege is not the right term, but he was really just such an extraordinary player at such a very young age when he first joined the band back there on that Dragonfly album. I mean, he was still a teenager, if I'm not mistaken. So even by this point in 1978, he's still relatively a young pup in terms of years on planet Earth, but quite the old soul and quite the mature musician and quite the accomplished musician, even at such a young age, because he had been in the business professionally for so long. And just such a gifted player. Craig Chiquiso always just had stellar tones, such great feel, great touch, great technique. Craig Chiquiso, great example of a guy who, as I said, could play a number of electric guitars, get a number of different sounds out of an electric guitar, acoustic guitars. You could play them all. It was all super tasty. And really a great example of a guy who had technique all over the place, huge chops, but could just play with so much soul and so much feeling. And even way back there in the day as a relative youngster, man, he was such a great player. Craig Chiquiso, as I said, he goes on to, good for him, get some name recognition and build quite a nice solo career there in the realm of new age instrumentals, sort of contemporary jazz instrumentals later on there in the 90s and the 2000s. Did some really nice work in his solo career and got the recognition that he justly deserved all along, because, man, back there in the Starship days, the interplay, that is some of the greatest interplay back and forth that you'll ever hear in your life between a lead singer and a guitar player. The way that Marty Balin and Craig Chiquiso had that little call and response thing going on there. Oh, my goodness. And once again, the final word. What else can I say about my man, Marty Balin? If I look at these, now certainly he did other things and he made other contributions to the band, but I'm just going to call out those 5 particular songs I mentioned. Caroline from 74 from the Dragonfly album. Miracles from Red Octopus, With Your Love from Spitfire, and Count on Me and Runaway. These 2 songs from this album, Planet Earth. You just take those 5 songs across, 4 years there, and there is just such a signature and such an identity, and not to mention, of course, so much success there on the radio side and in generating single sales and album sales. That Marty Balin sound, such an iconic sound. Yes, it's not totally representative of everything that the band could do. No kidding, Sherlock. Just hearing what great musicians they are, you know that they can play so many different things. But yeah, this lineup, man, there's every one of these songs, especially the Marty Balin ones, every one of these songs that I could play you by these guys, those 5 songs there, the support and the backing track by these musicians is just so incredibly well done and so professionally perfect that I go back and listen to them now, and I'm still just in awe of them. And we haven't even gotten to a couple of my special favorites on this list, but we will. So there we go. That sort of wraps up our trip through the 70s, huh? 100 songs from the 70s I've given you here over the last year or so, roughly a year, I guess, 11 months, something like that. Now we're going to jump into some 80s and 90s and some other stuff, maybe a few oldies. You never know, from back in the 60s. You never know what will be next, but let's go hear some other things, right? But 70s, though. Oh, my goodness. This was 78. What a year. I was just going through the year of 78 and looking at all the classic songs. Just unbelievable. And as I've said so many times, there's just years on the calendar there where it's just one incredible classic song after another. It seems like you just couldn't, they were just coming out so fast I could hardly keep up with them. That's where we're headed in the 80s. See you there. Hope you dug Marty Balin, Craig Chaquico, that whole classic Starship lineup. Run, 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 run. See you in the 80s, folks. Bye. Marty, man. What I wouldn't give to have that dude's voice. Oh, my God.